hit quick, hit while the iron's hot. Don't go out then and do your analysis of which product do we want to deploy, what's the cost of deployment of those products. By the time you come back 30 days later, or even maybe longer in some cases, the fire's off. So make sure you're ready to go.
This is a Security Weekly production. Security Weekly is a resource of Cyber Risk Alliance.
The Cybersecurity Collaborative, in conjunction with Cyber Reason, is proud to present CISO Stories. Each week, CISO Stories takes a deep dive on security leadership. The Cybersecurity Collaborative is a unique membership community enabling cybersecurity leaders to work together in a trusted environment. To learn more, visit securityweekly.com/CSC. I'm your host, Todd Fitzgerald, and this week we welcome James Christiansen, Vice President, Cloud Security Transformation and Leader of Chief Strategy Office for Netskope. James has previously been CISO in several large organizations, including Teradata, Experian Americas, General Motors, and Visa International. What made you want to get into cybersecurity?
Yeah, it's an interesting story, Todd. I've never set out to be in security. I didn't come out of law enforcement or some of the natural paths. I was very much an engineer, and I've gone back and forth in my career between, being a real heavy tech guy to being more of a business leader, running call center to running large scale networks. And I was at Visa, and I'd been there for some time, and I ran what was called our Planning and Systems Engineering Group. So I had everything that went cross domain in technology, and Visa being, a very, very large technology company, it was quite a great role. I had one of my groups, I had emerging technologies as one of my teams. And so that was somewhat the CTO role at Visa at the time. And in that group, I had one group called security technologies. And what happened was, by this time, I'd been with Visa for some time, and I sat on the operating committee, and we had a breach. Now, this would be before having a breach was cool. And we got a lot of uproar from the association, the banking members, our banks, and the press about this breach. And we were in a meeting, and the CEO was going, what do we do? What do we do about this? And I didn't notice the other senior vice presidents had kind of taken a step back. And because I had that one group called Security Technologies, I was told to go put a business case together. What should we do? Solve this problem. Go figure it out, come back in 2 weeks and advise the board here. So I did. I went out, and I'd been a systems programmer, so I installed like RACF and Top Secret, but I was not a security guy. So I spent the next 2 weeks literally reading everything I could find on security, talking to anybody I could talk to about security, to learn everything I could in just that time. I used my MBA practice to put together a business case. And so I went back, I said, well, here's the 5 functional areas of a security group. We should create, first of all, even the idea of creating a team called information security. And at Visa, we called them divisions. So we created an information security division. Here's the 5 functional areas. Here's 3-year goals and objectives. Here's the first year budget and hiring plan. So I laid this all out with the idea they would say, hey, great job, James. Let's go hire a security guy and get this done. Well, I got half of that. I got great job, James. But the other half was go do it. So I made a deal that I would roll it out 3 years and come back in to the core IT as sort of a CTO. And in that 3 years, rolling out the first security program for Visa, I found out I really loved security because I was a technologist at heart. But what's great about security and what has always attracted me is you've got the latest in technology, so that's interesting, but you add the human element. And adding that human element changes the dynamic. So ever since I've stayed in security, and I still love it, Todd.
Oh, that's a great story, and I love how you've matched up that technical knowledge, but then realized you had to pivot into your MBA when you were talking with the business leaders.
Yeah, I've always found, one of the things for any CISO is so important is remember you're part of a business and you're doing everything you do is for the stockholders. and the best interest of stockholders. That's why during my career, I pivoted back and forth as well from being a business leader to a technology leader to a business leader. Because I think keeping that balance is really important, especially nowadays where the role of the CISO has changed so much since back in those days when I was with Visa, and the skill set you need each day is very different. You've got to have business acumen. You've got to be able to speak and write. You need to know the technology, but you also need to understand the laws for the privacy laws in the countries you run. So you have to be part attorney, part technologist, part businessman, and getting that balance right is some of the art of being a CISO.
Absolutely. And I like it, that you mentioned the privacy laws in there. And I think, when I, wrote about the CISO evolution, it's kind of how we got there is, going from the technical to the risk to the privacy and data aware today. So let's flip over to your piece on too much security money, and I find the title very intriguing in that it's almost a contrarian view. As a CISO, you'd be looking at it and saying, "Well, what do you mean too much security money? I don't seem to have that problem." So, could you walk us through that?
Yeah, sure, Todd. So I was thinking about, there's so many great CISOs out there and so many great thoughts about organizational structure, risk management. And I was trying to think of something different to write about. So I pulled from an example one time in my career, and it starts off with, we were in this organization. I was getting ready to go to my budget meeting. Well, it was one of those tough budget years where I knew they were looking for places to cut. And I thought, well, what can I do unique this year? So I went in and I said, hey, I went and I said, well, I contributed, $800 million to the bottom line this year, or the top line, sorry, revenue. And the CEO and CFO were, all ready to do scratching, looked over at me and said, what? Now, how did you contribute to revenue? So I went through what I'd done is I'd taken every client that I'd had to meet with during the year to demonstrate our security controls, because we would not win the contract if we couldn't show them that we would secure their data once it was on our systems. So I just added the revenue. Now I know I was taking 100% sort of credit for those accounts, but I explained that's how much it added up to just this year. So we have, and so what the CEO and CFO decided was it was sort of a competitive advantage for us. So what they did was I get a call a few days later from the CEO and said, hey, I want to be best in the industry. I want the best security program there is. What would we have to do? So like any good CISO, I had a list of, my bucket list of things I wanted to get in and kind of a roadmap. So I wrote them all up. I wrote every one of those projects up, and I went in with a full portfolio of projects, a 3-year rolling plan of what we should do, hoping that he would increase my budget and fund some of those. Now, here's where it goes south, and this is where we get too much money, is in that process, he said, okay, do them all, and I want them all done this year. And I kind of said, at first, like most CISOs, I was elated, right? You've been hoping for maybe a small security breach just to get some attention. You don't want a big one, but here I am. We haven't had a breach. And yet I've been offered a blank check. So went in, I launched 15 projects to upgrade our entire security portfolio to bring us the latest in technology, people, and process that we could put in.
That would be most CISO's dream.
Yeah, exactly. So, every day was calling providers on the way home on the drive, in the morning, Dave was running all these projects, getting them all launched. And here's the thing that you can have too much money. The lesson here is really around corporate change and the ability to adapt to change. While we had the funds and the means to deploy all these projects, what we found, or what I learned from them, it was too much change to the organization itself. Now, don't be confused. I'm not talking about change control and making IT kind of changes. This is how much people can adjust and change at once. As we were asking the company to change the way they've been doing things, to do this rapid change. We did a lot of awareness and training, but it was just too much change. So the lesson I learned there was, there is just so much you can do in one period of time. And if you have that lucky circumstance that I did, restrain. You have to say, you know what, I can go ahead and I can do these projects, but I need to maintain somewhat of an accelerated posture, but not try to ram everything in at once.
Sure.
You should always be able to demonstrate your value of your security program in terms of revenue. I don't care what industry you're on, think about that, because that's your strongest argument when you're talking about budgets, is how do I generate revenue? How do I get on that side? How do I attract and retain profitable customers? And again, it doesn't matter what sector you are involved there. It just takes a little bit of creative thinking. I've got a couple of other things that I'd like to talk about there, Todd, with some tips, but why don't I pause for a second?
Yeah. So is there there's always this discussion about, what percentage of your budget, your IT budget is security, and should it be a percentage of the IT budget at all? And should it be a percentage of revenue? Did you have any metrics that you found were pretty useful to kind of give a sense of how much security was really a part of that revenue in terms of establishing what that budget was? Or did that?
Yeah, that's an ongoing debate, Todd, we see all the time in our industry. What's the right amount of budget? I've had every CEO I've worked for say, how much do we spend compared to our competitors on security? And a very valid question. So that's hard data to get out. I've seen the metrics. The old metric used to be a percentage of your IT budget. Like when I ran security globally for GM, it was the measure we used then to say we're spending the right amount. In fact, and during the financial crisis, that's right after 9/11, we were actually asked by the government how much we spending on security worldwide, and had to generate that number, which was quite surprising when we added it all up. And that was a great metric in those days. The problem with that metric today is so much of spend on information systems is outside of IT. In fact, the preponderance, I would argue, in many cases. So that metric no longer is valid because of SaaS applications, business digitalization, and the culture and the way we run our companies these days. So I looked at revenue as a basis, and that's good for some sectors that can actually, the amount of security you need to run your organization fluctuates with revenue. There's some correlation there. Maybe it's the number of customers, number of systems, et cetera, that tightly correlate. So sometimes that can be a good measure. I've seen measures that are based on number of employees. So like maybe manufacturing, where there isn't that elasticity by number of customers. It's more driven by the number of employees that you're helping protect. What you have to really look for, in my view, is a metric that ties to your business and how it fluctuates up and down, and how the cost associated with securing and providing the right level of security fluctuates with it. Wish there was one answer for all, but it'll be an ongoing debate, especially as we move more into business digitalization and, of course, now our remote workforce driving additional costs.
The article this podcast is based upon can be viewed in the best-selling cybersecurity leadership book, CISO Compass, Navigating Cybersecurity Leadership Challenges with Insights from Pioneers, available at Amazon.com and other booksellers. And I like what you said that it was throwing all kinds of new people and processes and just the sheer number of projects that the organization couldn't absorb. But what projects or areas did you find were the most challenging to get the organization up quickly to make those changes?
Yeah, and it's pretty standard. Anything that impacted the end user. So like we were putting new firewalls in that had impact, monitoring that had impact, anything that the user had to learn and adjust to, even down to encryption of confidential data. Back then, of course, this has been a few years ago, we talked about encrypted file folders. Now it's transparent, but at the time it wasn't. So those projects anything that impacts the client, being the end client, the endpoint, or anything that impacts the behavior of the way they do their job day to day, are those most challenging. I could put a network project in place that took care of network traffic, and it was only between myself and the IT group that had to worry about that. But the others, have direct impact to the business. Those were the most challenging, Todd.
Good perspective. So what are some of those tips, that you would have for people that are going after the security budget?
Yeah, first of all, think about your argument. I once read an article called Selling Security. And the thing is, if you're trying to maintain your budget, and my entire career, never had a budget cut year over year, and only one time was it flat, and that was during the middle of the financial crisis. At least stayed flat where everybody else was being cut. So the thing first, your strongest argument, if you're trying to justify your cost of your division or your department, is around, as I mentioned earlier, revenue generation. And how do you help obtain and retain profitable customers? I'll say that one more time. Obtain and retain profitable customers, because that's the way your leadership thinks. Your second strongest, of course, is now around cost avoidance, which is a far cry, which is going to be, reputation damage, breach reputation, things like that. Anything that, if you can go after the bottom line, so you can say, you know what, I don't have a good argument for revenue generation, but I can cut our costs. If we implement better identity management, I can reduce my HR workload there, and therefore I can cut costs. So that's true cost savings. Then cost avoidance, which is that breach management, insurance, things that we're not going to have to spend more on if we do these things. And of course, compliance. I once went to work for a company, and as the new CISO, and the prior head of security, they weren't CISO, but prior head had used compliance as the driver for everything. So, if we don't do this, we're not going to be PCI compliant. If we not do that, we're not going to be XY compliant. So much so, Todd, it was just crazy. My first meeting with the executive team, literally their eyes would glow red if you said the word compliant. They just had it rammed down their throat. Just rammed down their throat. So I would avoid using compliance as that crutch. And often it is a crutch. Well, if we don't do this, we're not going to be compliant with that, whether it be customer contracts, et cetera. By the way, customer contracts is always a place you should look, because often they'll have a rider in there what are our expectations of security. So again, that's back to that revenue, obtain and retain customers. So if we don't do this, we're at risk of losing this customer who has these requirements on us. So that's sort of the tips around maintaining a budget and getting funding like I did in my past. You should.
And I also like what you said, where you had a 3-year rolling plan. So I get the sense, with some CISOs, it's, I put my 3-year plan together and it's done. But, that's kind of a living, breathing thing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I just posted a series of blogs recently called the Forces of Security Strategy. And what that's about is exactly this. Your strategy has to be continuously adapting. You've got to be looking at what are the forces on my strategy. And that's what I'm talking about in those blogs is, and I've got a white paper on the same subject, just all of them combined, is what is changing in my external world, whether it be the business, the economics, the world climate, things like the pandemic we've been through, that means I need to adjust my security strategy. So it's not one and done. It should be, updated continuously with the changes in your business, et cetera. So I think that's a real important part of being a well-rounded CISO.
So what tips would you give to a CISO to help them understand when they're getting to that point where maybe I'm being asked to do too much and I'm getting too much budget?
Yeah, that's not a common problem. The better learning there is how to maintain the level of change control within your organization, how much can it absorb. And that's really back to another really good aspect of being a successful CISO or a better one. And that's really understanding the culture you're working in. How risk averse is the culture? How fast can change be adapted? The company I'm with now is very quickly adapting to change, very high. But if you think about, I mentioned GM earlier, a very traditional company, it's not going to adapt to change so quickly. So think about the culture you're in. How risk averse is it? How well is it able to adapt to change? How open are they to new ideas? And how well will they embrace which message you have? Is it going to be driving revenue? Is it going to be cutting costs? Is it going to be avoiding costs? Or is it going to be compliant? You're the best judge there as the CISO. But you make that judgment based on understanding the culture and take the time to understand the priorities of your executive team. If you want to be successful, you should understand each one of those execs and what's important to them. So when you have a conversation, you are talking to them about what is important. You're talking to the CIO, they're interested in deploying product quickly, fastly, and cheaper, right? So you want to talk about how you're going to help them in that journey. You're talking to the CFO, you want to talk about how you're working to cut bottom line costs. Talking to the CEO, you're back to revenue. So thinking about those different roles and where their key interests are, you really should think about your talk track and making sure you have that strategy. And that strategy is 1, risk-focused, 2, align with the business, and 3, agile. So it can be changed as those conditions change.
I like that. I also like that you said, don't miss the opportunity. Roll those funds into the next year, while you're there. Get those commitments going forward.
Yeah, memories are short in business. If you learn one thing, memories are very short. So when you do have, let's just call it a security event. I don't wish a breach on anyone, but when you do have an event, make sure you've got those projects already mapped out. You know how much money you're going to need. You know what kind of funding, and hit quick, hit while the iron's hot. Don't go out then and do your analysis of which product do we want to deploy, what's the cost of deployment of those products. By the time you come back 30 days later, or even maybe longer in some cases, the fire's off. So make sure you're ready to go. You have those in your pocket. You've already done the research. You've already looked at those next projects, and you're ready.
Great advice. Any last tips for our listeners that you want to leave us with?
Yeah, the role of the CISO, that both you and I have seen, Todd, through the years, has changed quite dramatically. And I think, we've been through a number of evolutions from mainframes to client server, real big change in how we approach security and technology. Then we went from, the next one was probably the advent of the internet, and it really changed the way, we thought about e-commerce and the way, again, in security, we had to think about, how we protect our corporate assets. And I would look right now, we have yet another opportunity where we're changing. It's massive change behind business digitalization. Sorry, tongue-tied there. And when you think about that, how's that impacting the way you're thinking about securing your program? Now, in those prior 3 evolutions that I talked about, they were driven by technology. There was big changes in technology that drove those changes. This last one actually is being driven by the business. So think about how that is changing the way you need to secure your environment. And the great thing, and I don't know if you've looked at the SASE architecture as coined by Gartner, but it gives us a chance to relook at our architecture and start, consolidating those security products that we've put in year after year as point problems arise. I've built the Frankenstein of security products. I've got 20 products now I can consolidate. So the thought I'd like to leave with, take a look at where you're at. Take a look at the cloud transformation that your company's doing, and think about how do you fit into that and how do you get out in front of this. Because if you're standing still, you're really falling backwards right now.
Well, great advice, James. And thanks a lot for taking the time today to share your thoughts. Very much appreciated.
Well, Todd, it's always a pleasure talking with you. I love the book. I've been in the industry forever, and I'm reading those chapters and find them amazing good. So congratulations on putting such a great book together.
Well, thank you very much.
Cybereason is the champion for today's defenders, providing an endpoint security platform to prevent, detect, and respond to malicious operations on computers, mobile devices, servers, and the cloud. Cybereason. End cyber attacks from endpoints to the enterprise to everywhere. Learn more at cybereason.com/CISO stories.